Welcome back to another episode of The Sweet Spot. This is John Sherman from the Four Foundations of Golf. And as always, I'm joined by.
Adam from Adamian Golf.
So you came across a Ben Hogan quote recently. Is that right? That kind of moved you a bit or got your attention that you want to talk about today?
It was very apt because there was lots of talk about shaping, lots of debate on it. And it's not even clear what the debate is. I know we've done a whole episode on it, but I thought I'd dig deeper into this Hogan quote that I saw because when I posted it and the discussion came out, all the same arguments came out again. So it's obviously it's still not very clear in people's heads what the reality of the situation is. So I thought I'd go through that quote
Uh,
and say,
it,
I basically posted saying, this is what Hogan said. I disagree with it.
what a great way to
What are
yeah,
your thoughts?
what a great way to phrase it. I'm sure nobody got angry at that.
Yeah. Well, obviously some of the ones you can, some of the counter arguments you can get rid of, like, oh, well, Hogan was the best player in the world, therefore he's correct. I mean, that's just a logical fallacy. So I'm interested in what reality is, regardless of where it comes from, what
So what's the
correctness, what
quote?
truth is. So the quote was, you only hit a straight ball by accident. The ball is going to move right or left every time you hit it. So you had better make it go one way or the other. Now, I didn't disagree with the whole quote.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
certain parts that you kind of have to agree with, but yeah, you only hit a straight ball by accident. The ball is going to move right or left every time you hit it. So you had better make it go one way or the other. I emphasize certain words there. What's your interpretation of that?
I think like my instant reaction is that yes, it's difficult and almost not something you should expect to hit a perfectly straight shot just because you have to have a zeroed out path and a 0 degree face angle or a path. If it was straight right or straight left, a path and face angle that are perfectly aligned. So yeah, that's difficult to match those two things up perfectly or expect it. So that makes sense. Is he referring to kind of like maybe we always talk about like the less double crossing thing. Would you rather the ball fall more left than right more of the time? Yeah, I guess I'd like to live on one side of the spectrum more to understand it, but that also in pursuit of that could lead to extreme situations. Like if someone said to me like, "Oh, I tracked all my tee shots and 80% of them missed the fairway on the left. That's good because I know they're missing to left." I would be like, no, that's not good. That's not in balance. So that's like the other end of it. So yeah, like many quotes out there, you take a historical person's quote that's one or two sentences and people can inject all types of meaning into it and kind of put their own spin on it. But yeah, it's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's not even really clear what a double cross is. You ask different people for their definition, and it's not solid.
Mhm.
Like you said, missing one way, people confuse both of those as well. Double cross, missing one way. As you said,
I think
missing
there's
one
a
way would be
feeling,
missing
yeah.
a target in one direction,
Yeah,
which is not good. We know that.
I think there's a general. Maybe it would be hard to define it exactly, like kind of writing a rule in golf is so difficult because people are like, "Oh, you should get relief in the fairway from divots," and you're like, "Well, actually, writing that rule would be quite difficult." Actually, I think it's more of like a feeling when someone knows they're playing well. Like when I'm playing well, I feel like I'm not going to hit a massive pull hook. And I think that's what, Hogan was terrified of that too. Like I know that shot is going to happen less often. And I kind of have that feeling. I guess that's more of that would be less of the double cross to me.
Even that class is almost a big miss because
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
double cross, usually most people say it's when it not only doesn't curve your intended direction,
Yeah.
but
It goes
starts
the
to curve the
opposite.
opposite. So in other words, you
Exactly.
try and hit a draw, and
Yep.
instead of it coming out a draw, it comes out a push slice.
That's my definition of
So
it. Yes. It's the exact
yeah,
opposite. Or when the face is outside of the path, right? So we'd say, like, if your intention was to hit a draw, the face would need to be close to the path and open to your target, so in between the two. And if the face got way too open outside of your path, then you will hit that push cut. So that to me is a double cross when the face gets outside of the path in the opposite direction.
exactly. But what happens when you get to the point where, when I'm playing some of my best golf, my path is close to 0.
Mm.
So what is the double cross then? Or even when
Yeah,
it's
well,
1 degree into out, which at 180 yards is like 9 foot away from the target. What is my double cross then? If I hit it 10 foot to the right, that's technically a double cross. Is there a boundary where it becomes a double cross? It's like, okay, 10 foot right is not. But okay, if it's 30, 40 feet right, then it's a double cross. But then it's
yeah.
just a case of,
So,
well, that's just a bad shot. Does it matter that it double crossed? Or like if I
yeah.
hit 130 left, that's not a double cross,
Well, I
and I
think
hit
there's some
120 right,
nuance.
there is a double cross. Which one would you
Yeah.
prefer?
Yeah, so I guess there's some nuance there because most golfers are living on one side of like the swing path, right? So most golfers are going to be like 5 degrees out to in or 5 degrees into out or even more extreme. So like they are living on one side of the path spectrum. Therefore, the double cross is easier to define there. So now I don't know what the distribution of golfers would be. It'd actually be interesting. I don't know if TrackMan or any of those companies have done a study to see what the distribution of swing paths are. I'd imagine that the minority of them are going to be not in between -1 and +1, like what you are, more close to zeroed out. So then, yeah, in that instance, I think a double cross becomes harder to define because it's more of like, oh, your face was way too closed or way too open because now you're seeing both. And to me, that was also one reason why, yeah, for some players, maybe zeroed out isn't a good thing because it's kind of a weird place to live in when you see the ball falling to the left and the right and you're not seeing that consistent curvature.
Yeah, and
Some
therein
some
lies
people might
my
that yeah,
main
that
argument. And as always, there are gray areas here, or this is on a spectrum. There's not necessarily a an absolute answer for everybody, and this argument exists on the spectrum as well, which I'll explain. But yeah, defining what a double cross is actually quite difficult when you pin people down on it. Usually, they're talking about a big miss, which a big miss might not be the double cross for you and me both. I think is the pull hook, right, where we get the
yeah,
face
yeah.
too closed.
Like I'm trying to play golf with more of an open face, right? So at
Yeah,
impact. And when my face is closed at impact, it is the exact opposite of my intention. Like I do not like that at all. I could live with a more open face. If I block it, I could live with that. It's the smothered pull that I don't like living with.
yeah, yeah. So let's break that quote down. The first start, you only hit a straight ball by accident. I agree with that to a certain extent. Although I suppose you'd have to define, well, what is straight? If you're talking about a ball that starts 0.0, has zero curve on it, and there's
Mm.
no wind as well,
Yeah, yeah,
then
yeah,
that's a straight. It never happens, right?
yeah. I would think
But
like,
the argument,
yeah, it would be my guess is like something that's like starts very close to the target and stays around it, obviously to the eye, not perfectly aligned.
well, yeah, if you widen the window of acceptability to what is straight, if you say a shot that starts within half a degree of the target and lands within 10 feet of it. I asked ChatGPT the other day out of my shot patterns how many were in that, had those definitions, and it was like 5 or 10% or something. It definitely wasn't zero.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would consider those straight shots. But yeah, I mean, technically, okay, if you're going to be absolute ball that starts 0.0 offline, has zero curvature to it, and there's no wind in there as well,
Yeah, it's
knocking it
perfect, right?
offline, then
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's pretty much a zero chance of happening. However, the conclusion people then say is therefore you should try and shape it. Well, the counter argument to that is if you were trying to hit a 10-yard draw, an exact 10-yard draw that starts 10 yards right and curves in onto the target is also just as impossible to hit there exactly.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
always
it's
going to
it's
start it
a
maybe .1 of a degree more right, or it curves a little bit more left, or a little less left, or there's some wind in there that changes it. So it's just as impossible to hit an exact shaped shot.
that is an interesting point. It's essentially your straight shot, right? So if you were someone that would be your version of a straight shot is when you I guess it's when it's really I mean, now that I'm thinking of it, it's more of we get back to face control always. It's when you control the club face perfectly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
what these
mean,
shots are when you have perfect club face control, which is hard. And as you said, like the minority of shots.
yeah. So yeah, that part of the quote, you only hit a straight ball by accident. Lots of people went into the equipment argument with that. They're saying, oh, the equipment with in Hogan's era made it harder to hit a straight shot because the balls were spinnier. Yes, that's true. However, technically, if you present a zero, like a perfectly square path and square face, with old equipment and new equipment, it would go dead straight. But the chance of doing that is just as low. So if you present it even 0.00001 open, the ball's going to curve. It'll curve more with an old equipment, but it'll still curve slightly. So really the chance of hitting it with old equipment and new equipment is still very close to zero. So I don't think the equipment, the age of equipment is a good argument there for that. But that wasn't even my point with that quote. So yeah, define what straight is. Are we talking literal, or are we having some wiggle room in there? Anything within 10 feet. And like I said, a curved shot then is just as difficult to hit, an exact curve, whatever you're trying to hit. So people usually say, oh, well, if a straight shot is impossible to hit, then curve shot must be easier. And it's not. It's the same level of difficulty to hit. The next part, the ball is going to move right or left every time. I said, yeah, that's true with old equipment, new equipment. Here's the thing though. Does that mean we shouldn't try to hit a straight shot? That's the ultimate question I'm asking. It's not whether you hit a straight shot or not. It's whether in the act of trying to hit a straight shot, your dispersion is better. So we have to think of our game over 10, 20, 100, 1,000 attempts, not over one attempt.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you're thinking over one attempt, is it possible to hit that straight shot? No. But if you hit 100 shots trying to hit a straight shot, what is the outcome, the dispersion? What are the probabilities within that shot pattern? And then you do the same for trying to curve it. You say, okay, well, if I try and hit that 10-yard draw it 100 times, what are the outcomes for that? And then you can pick the best one, the best series of outcomes. So maybe the draw is better. Maybe the straight shot is better. Lots of people, when I do this in social media, automatically assume that I'm telling everybody, you got to go out and try and hit it as straight as possible. I'm not saying that. I'm on record here not saying that. I've been on record
I
before.
mean,
I don't.
that is the, I think we mentioned this at the beginning of the year. I haven't really been posting at all on social media lately just because this is the crux of it. Like when you do short statements like this, everything gets lost in translation because people, want to inject their own opinion to it. And then you're in a different place from where you started. And it's a very imperfect way to state something, which is, I think, why we like long form better because you can provide more nuance.
Yeah. Yeah, the summary of that would be me saying that straight is okay is not
Yeah.
me telling everybody that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to go out and try to now hit it straight. I'm also saying drawing it 10 yards or attempting to draw it exactly 10 yards is okay as well.
This is an
And then we
interesting thing. I haven't done what you've done with I'm a heavy chat GPT user myself, and I know we did an episode on AI recently, but it's actually an interesting, I'm going to try some of these things. I think now that you can have something analyze, if you did have access like to a simulator and you can export your club data, this would be a much easier way to get the analysis done that someone like me wouldn't. I'm not a very, deep numbers analytical person, but if I export the spreadsheet and say, hey, the first 10 shots I was trying to do this, the other 10 shots I was doing this, or 30 shots, whatever it was, give me a reasonable explanation of like the statistical outliers and what seemed better. That is I think a very positive and incredible use of AI.
I do it all the time. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, drawn up graphs and charts of, when the face is open X amount. I've done fades versus draws in there. There are some interesting nuances within this stuff, but yeah, I mean, you could just look at the standard deviation, hit fades in, hit draws in, have a look at the standard deviation, have a look at the average. And standard deviation won't tell you everything, but it gives you a very good idea of which one's going to be better for you overall. which shot pattern is going to be better for you. You can run more deeper analyses and say you can actually plug your shot pattern into ChatGPT and ask it things like simulate a green size that's here
Yeah,
and a
that's what I'm
flag
thinking.
that's
Like,
here and
yeah,
run a
yeah,
strokes gained analysis. You have to do quite a lot of legroom of um,
legwork.
work with it. Legwork, that's the one. Legroom,
You go.
work. So you have to plug in like, okay, yeah, the strokes gained for, and I actually do it on an individual level as well. If a
I think
player has
some
a
of the apps,
25% up and down rate, then I'll
yeah,
do that for them. And
I think
then
some
and
of
then you
the
see, okay, which one is going to be better. And that's the initial thing. When I was doing this years and years ago, before AI, I thought that, oh, you're going to find that when the pin is on the right, a fade in is going to be better. When the pin is on the left, a draw in is going to be better. And almost every single time, the analysis that I did was the tightest shot dispersion was the best one. So if you hit a tighter shot dispersion with a fade, that was always the best option, regardless of where the pin was. You just change your target. That's all.
well, I think that's the fallacy of shaping in general. So I kind of view it as like the romanticized version of golf. So when people argue about golf and strategy and all this stuff, typically the side that, wants to say like, oh, shape it here and shape it there, it's like kind of in a vacuum. It's like, well, of course I'd want to hit a left to right shot on a dog leg right or a back right pin. Like that just makes total sense. And then when you say like, well, what, when you pull it off, when you get the face control perfect, yeah, sure. Like that's kind of what you like we were talking about before, like Hogan's straight shot or hitting that perfect 5 yard draw or fade. But the more important question is like, well, what happens the other 87 times you do it? Like, are you hitting so many shots that are utter crap that the one great outcome can't make up for it? Or maybe some I have to imagine there are some golfers who can work it in both directions and get the benefit. I'd assume they're outliers, but they've got to be out there.
Yeah, and the benefit is usually not what people think it is. So I said when I was doing those analyses, I was looking mainly at left to right, so lateral dispersion. I found that the advantage was usually the tightest pattern was almost always the best one. However, there are some nuances. Maybe I'll go through that at the end of this in terms of when you try to shape a draw versus a fade. The dispersion tends to be the same, but it changes shape.
Yeah, the north south
And
probably
that may
changes.
be an advantage for a very specific group of people who can hit both shapes to roughly an equal level and can do it on the course and then overlaying it onto certain shot patterns. So I'll try and go
So
through that at the end of this.
what I'm thinking of is someone who, let's say, is a draw player who naturally probably spins it a little less and closes the face more, so they hit it a bit farther. And then when they hit the fade, let's say they're in a situation where like, and this is an advanced player, where they hit the fade and it takes some distance off. And then that might be the better shot for them because they know that it might take some distance off because that's their tendency. That would be one, theoretical example to me of a better player who could choose between those two.
Yeah, I mean, I see these things on the course all the time. If I'm standing there with a sand wedge, and between my sand wedge and my gap wedge,
Mhm.
there's about 15 yards difference. If I'm trying to bust a sand wedge there, sometimes I will just close my stance off a little bit, close the face, and hit a more of a drawy shot in. It adds another 5 yards, or I can even get an extra 10 yards out of it if I need to. So those are examples where you can get those half club gaps. Whether or not you should do those things, like I say, if in the attempt to get that extra distance, you start to have a bigger
Yeah,
lateral
yeah.
spread, it might not be worth it. But if you have the ability and you've proven it in training and then on the course, then that might be an option for you. So there are players who could do that. Okay, I'll go there then. So the advantages that I see or the change that I see is when I ran a test recently where luckily for me, my draw 7-iron and my fade 6-iron go the same distance, right? They both go about 175. So if I'm trying to draw a 7-iron in or fade a 6-iron, they both go 175. So I can compare those two. If I'm imagining a 175 target, I could say, well, I have the option to draw it with a 7 or fade it with a 6. So I did that the other day. I hit a bunch of balls with both. And what I found was I actually hit with straight as well. The winner for me was straight. That's just me. I'm not saying everybody should do that, but the winner for me was straight. It had the tightest dispersion overall. Now, when I plugged the numbers into ChatGPT and I asked it to normalize the data a little bit, I ran did a bunch of leg room, wink, wink, a bunch of leg work,
Got a ton of leg room on his
intentional
flight.
mistake there, yeah. And I asked it to normalize the data. So I said, okay, imagine now we hit shots towards our target with a fade. And then I want you to simulate having the face 2 degrees too open to it and 2 degrees too closed to that online shot. So I'm hitting a 10-yard fade or a 10-yard draw on, and then we open the face 2 degrees accidentally, close the face 2 degrees, and also everything in between as well. So we're getting a dispersion pattern there, but we're simulating the same club face control. What happens is with the draw shot, you get a bigger spread side to side. Okay. But carry distance improves. Carry distance reduces. I'll explain why in a moment. With the fade, what happened is, again, same face error, same path error. With a fade, you get a tighter distribution. So there's some truth to, you can talk to a fade, you can't talk to a hook. Yeah, a fade shot was tighter. But the distance control was more spread out. And when I looked at it, it was almost equal. So I said, well, what was the total dispersion? I simulated, average proximity to the flag, and it was almost the same for all of them. It just changed the shape. So
Okay.
you could say on the one hand, just pick the one you're best at and use that. Whereas on a more elite end, if you are a professional golfer, or even a high-end amateur who can hit all shapes, like I can hit all the shapes to a reasonable degree. A fade might favor a situation where you have a deep green,
Yeah.
so it's long front to back, but it's narrow. So left to right, it's quite tight but deep. And a draw might suit where you have to control the carry distance a little better. But it has a wider green. So you can imagine there's big wide greens, not too deep, maybe.
Yeah, it's
I
favoring
need to
north
run a
south
little
over
bit.
east west. Yeah, yeah. I guess it would be
Yeah.
interesting to see what the. I guess that's in a bit of a theoretical vacuum. It'd be interesting if you got 10 really good golfers who are capable of hitting both shot shape, like yeah, let's call tour players. Run that experiment. Say hit 20 shots this way, 20 shots this way, and 20 shots this way, and then plot them out and see if there's the east west north south thing that you're seeing.
And that's how you have to think of this. And I have gone through all data with different players and who I run these tests with, and I see the same thing. Usually the fade pattern is tighter, but more north to south tilted, and the draw shot is more level, but wider. Now, this does depend again on the player. So if you have a player who's super good at a draw shot and they just can't hit a fade to save their life, they might actually see a wider fade because you have theory, but then you have the human's ability to implement that theory. So there are two things going on. I think both are important to know. I think it's important to know that, okay, for this individual, they are better with a fade shot, for example, right? And even that's a in this moment thing. It could be that in the future, that might not be the case. And then you have the theoretical ideal of, okay, if you had the ability to hit each one with equal level of skill, the fade would suit these scenarios. The draw would probably suit these scenarios. So at the elite end, that might be a case for shaping both ways.
Yeah, I think
Trying to draw into a certain target, trying to fade it into a certain target. That is a good argument for it. I'm not saying that I know there's probably one person shouting at the screen right now or shouting at their phone if they're ever listening to this, which I'm sure they're not. There are caveats to the nth degree of that, but
but most
it's an important
golfers,
consideration.
yeah, you would say, but most golfers are going to fall into the bucket of more trouble than it's worth,
Yeah,
meaning going
yeah,
outside of
exactly.
their stock pattern. Like it's the amount of time, reps, confidence, to bring a different shot out on the course. I always think of like all these different levels. So for me to, let's say I was going to be working on a punch fade shot, let's say it's something that's genuinely outside of my realm. Could I pull it off on the course sometimes? Probably, but I'd probably chunk a few, skull a few, pull hook a bunch of them. I would need to get, I don't know how many reps on the range, go through trying it, getting situationally, comfortable with it on the course. Like there's a whole process you need to go through if you want to say to yourself, okay, this is an option for me that potentially could gain strokes in this situation versus nope, not going to play romantic golf. I'm just going to stick with what I'm used to and comfortable with because I didn't have the time, reps, or confidence to pull that shot off. And that's kind of the internal battle of golf in general. But that's why like people get angry because when you pop the balloon of the romantic version of golf, everyone's like, well, that's not what it's supposed to be. I'm like, yeah, but I would say that version, that theoretical version of golf only exists for a very select few. And many of them are not on the tours right now making good money. And even they don't try and play that way. There's been many, many, many pro golfers who've said, like, yeah, I thought I needed all the shots, but just started hitting cuts and I was fine.
Yeah, I'd say for the vast majority, pick your best dispersion pattern, play that almost exclusively, unless you have to shape it around a tree. I'd say for that.
Yes.
But then for the elite 0.1%, there may be some very good advantages that you can gain from this.
Yeah, I think Xander
So yeah,
Schauffele is an example of someone who bucked that trend. I'm almost positive Chris Como and him talked about him learning to shape it in both directions, and that was helpful to him winning 2 majors. Hopefully, I didn't put
yeah.
words in anyone's mouth, but I'm pretty sure I heard that. But again, he's a generational top 0.00001% golfer. Like, you don't take your cues from someone like that. He's got all the time in
Now,
the world to work on it.
if you want to know why the shot pattern changes, so again, we've got the same path or a locked in path, a fader's path or a drawer's path, same face variance around it, yet you get a different shape of dispersion. Same dispersion, just the shape changes. You're trading off distance control or carry distance control for directional control. Direction control with the fade, distance control, carry distance control more with the draw. The reason for that is when you hit a fade, you imagine you've got your path that's left. Now, if you hit the left side of your face window, now you've got the path going left and the face going left. You're basically hitting a straight 6-iron. It's going to go a country mile, right? So you've reduced. So spin loft, I'm sure people have heard of spin loft. We've talked about it here. Spin loft works in two ways. You have the vertical spin loft. So you have whether you're applying lots of dynamic loft relative to attack angle. That's going to create spin rate. But you also have the horizontal component. So that's the cutting across it part. Now, when we hit a pull shot, you have both a reduction in dynamic loft, which makes the ball go further,
So you're de-lofting it.
and you have a reduction in cutting across it, which makes it go further. So you have two elements on the pull which make it go farther. I should say farther, not further. I hate that when people do it writing, but although that's
The
not an
grammar
American thing, I don't.
police do not
Yeah,
have jurisdiction on podcasts.
I'm grammar policing myself. I have jurisdiction over myself here. So you got two elements on the pull making it go farther. Now, when you hit the right side of your face spectrum with a fade, you now have the open face is adding loft. So you've got an increase in vertical spin loft and you've got more cutting across it. So you now have two elements making it go shorter. That's why you get super long left or super short right.
Yeah, it makes
But
perfect sense.
yeah, but it just trades off accuracy because it's not the short right is not going as far offline because it dies out of the air because it's got so much spin. It's not traveling as much. It's got a lot more dynamic lofts. Tends to so, and again, this may be different for different players depending on how they play the fade. But I'd say this holds true for 95% of people based on
Yeah,
the data I see.
if you told me to weaken my grip and just make sure that my path was out to in, I would. I've done it on a launch monitor. I spin it about 1,000 more and I lose a full club of distance, sometimes more. I don't like it. I don't like the
Yeah.
feeling of it, so I don't even
Now,
try it.
if you did that with one club more, then you
Yes.
offset that part.
Yeah.
But the things that I talk about still remain there. Now, say I go to the draw side now, and I switch club. I go to a 7-iron, so I'm hitting a 7-iron draw. Why does a draw go longer? Because it has lower spin loft for that middle, the on target shot has a lower spin loft than the fade 6-iron. Now, with the draw, when you hit the left side of your spectrum, the face window, right, so you close the face down, you have a reduction in vertical spin loft, which makes it go farther. But you have an increase in cutting across it, which makes it go shorter. Those two negate each other, not perfectly, but they negate each other a little bit. So the long left with a draw doesn't actually carry as far as the long left with the fade would, because you've got the knocking down of distance by the cutting across it fact. And on the push shot, the right side end of your draw spectrum, yes, you have an increase in dynamic loft, so it goes a little higher, but you have a reduction in cutting across it because the face now lines up with the path. So you have a reduction in lateral cutting across it, face to path. So then you've got one element making it go shorter, which is the increase in vertical spin loft. But you got one element making it go farther, which is a reduction in horizontal spin loft. So again, the two cancel each other out, and that right shot doesn't fall as far short. So that's why you get more consistent carry distance with the draw shot. So, I mean, people don't need to know that. I'm sure there are listeners there, maybe 10% of people who are like, oh, I love that geeky stuff. I need to rewind it 5 minutes and
And
re-listen
then
to that.
other people are like, I have no idea what direction my ball's curving in, so it's irrelevant to me. Sometimes it goes that way, and
Yeah.
sometimes it goes the other way.
Well, it's with all these things, right? It's like if you listen to an entire podcast and just take one thing from it, just take that all else being equal, a fade might be tighter, but have increased distance dispersion, and vice versa.
Yeah, and yeah, there is no technical right answer on this stuff. It's more of like what choice gives you the best dispersion around your target versus when you go
Yep.
outside of that choice, does it shoot you in the foot more than it helps you? And that's usually the case for a lot of golfers.
Yeah, if you're thinking in terms of ideals, like if you had the ability to ingrain both, then ingrain both, and then you could use both. But if you are limited on time and you don't want to make those big changes to your swing, just pick the one that you're best at. I will say, and I've said this on other podcasts as well, the one that you are best at may not be your natural shape. For example, if I turn off my brain and just beat balls, I will start slinging balls in to the target right to left. There'll be big hooks onto the target. That's my natural shape. I define a natural shape as what you do without thinking about. I play better when I'm trying to neutralize that a little bit, when I'm feeling more of a fade swing. So yeah, test this thing. I know Lou Stagner found that with people. He asked them to hit fades and draws, and he found quite a large number of people hit it tighter when they were trying the opposite to their normal pattern.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Here's the other part of the quote. Ben Hogan, go back to
There's
Hogan.
more?
So, yeah. This is the part that I disagree with. So everything up until now, I've been
I
relatively
forgot.
okay.
I
You only hit
forgot.
a straight ball on accident. Yes, you do only hit a straight ball on accident, but you also only hit a 10-yard draw on accident. The ball is going to move right or left every time you hit it. Yes, that's true. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't try to hit it straight, because we're looking at the 100-shot patterns. So this is the part I disagree with. So you had better make it go one way or the other. That's the key that I'm talking about. The words are very specific to me. Go one way or the other. That means if you're trying to hit a draw, hit a better draw, especially when he says you better make it. If you are trying to hit a draw into this shot, into this flag, you better make sure that ball curves right to left. I disagree with that. And the reason why is if I want to guarantee the ball turns right to left,
Yeah, you'll have to
I
do
can
something
do
more
that by
extreme.
slinging in a 30-yard hook into the target. That's almost the only way that I'm going to close to guarantee that the ball curves right to left, is by slinging a big shape in there. Now, if I go the other end of the argument and say, well, what if I had a completely neutral path and I hit a mix of axes? So imagine I get my path 0.0 on average during a session. I hit 100 balls like that. I'm going to have some balls that fall right of that, some balls that fall left of that. Now, the question is, which one of those gives me a tighter dispersion overall? And I know if I'm trying to sling a shot into the target versus trying to go for neutral, I get a tighter dispersion with the neutral. Now, there's a whole spectrum here. So that is not to say the only options are sling it or neutral path. On that spectrum, you could call yourself I'm a 75% drawer. And what that would mean is if you hit 100 balls, 75 of them curve left and the other 25 are technical double crosses. You could be a 60% drawer. So 60% curve the way you want and the other 40% go to the right. You could be a 90% drawer, 90% curve left, 10% fall right, or flip it for fade if you want. Now, the question is, where on the spectrum do you produce a tighter dispersion? That's the question. That's the answer I would be looking for, is where on the spectrum do you hit your tightest shot pattern? Now, for me, it's around about 55 to 60% draw. So yes, I still hit a draw for the predominant amount of shots, but there's a hell of a lot of fades in there as well, a hell of a lot of mini double crosses. And that's what produces the tightest shot for me. And I know people say, I know one of the dominant names on the other end of the debate has said, well, you don't know that because how are you going to test that? I say, well, I've got lots and lots of range data. And I've also got about 10 years of course data being both. And I know I play better when I'm more neutral. So if I got 10 years of on-course data for myself, I know that's pretty good data to say that that's the most optimal one. And then again, when I plug it into ChatGPT says that this gives you the tightest dispersion and the best mix of both worlds in a way. So distance dispersion and direction dispersion. So what are your thoughts so far?
I mean, my main thought is this kind of illustrates the limitation of quotes in general pertaining to the golf swing or strategic stuff. Like there's always so much nuance in golf in particular versus maybe some other activities you could be doing. But yeah, I mean, listen, you could probably pick apart if someone talked about a running stride or something like that. Yeah, it's hard to take. Obviously, Hogan is a character, sorry, mythical figure in golf history. And, people still are buying the book in droves and taking every word he said as gospel. And yeah, it just shows like the limitation of like one to many advice in very short form. It's hard to apply and apply it to yourself correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to have a conversation with Hogan and ask him how much did you
Yeah.
actually mean of that? I've said
Imagine if
things
we could
that,
talk to him right now for 2 hours and ask him all of these things, and maybe he would clarify, and we'd be like, "Oh my god, it'd be probably be so amazing to listen to."
yeah. But I think it's important for listeners to understand that just because someone might be the best in the world at what they do doesn't mean that their advice is always correct. And I say things sometimes in the coach in the social media thing, and people might pick that apart and take things that I didn't mean from it. That's why it's important to then have a conversation and say what you really meant. Unfortunately, Hogan's not here to be able to tell us what he really meant. But what I'm arguing against or debating is people's interpretation of
Yeah,
what he
yeah.
meant.
Well,
And the
listen,
reason why it's important is,
there's a whole industry of, I'm just thinking of, like, people who've interpreted the Bible and other religious texts, the US Constitution and other, I mean, these are things, rules were written down, and there's,
well,
thousands of people interpreting them. Did they really mean that? Did they really mean that in this statement? And they argue about it tooth and nail.
interestingly, downstairs right now is my good friend. I'm not going to mention him by name, but he's staying with me for a couple of days. He's a pastor. And I asked him yesterday, how do you differentiate between people's interpretation of the word of the Bible
Yeah.
versus what you feel is actual God's word? And his answer to that, at least my interpretation of what he said it's very grammatical. He said,
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
just literally take the grammar. And that's what I'm doing
yeah,
with Hogan's quote here. He's
yeah.
saying, you had better, as in, make sure, make it. Make is to force something to happen, make it go one way or the other, not both. So I'm taking it for its literal grammatical interpretation there. And yeah, he may not have actually meant that, but that's what I'm taking it for here. And so this isn't the same as should I draw or fade a shot in. This isn't the same as saying, oh, the pin's on the left, I'm going to draw it in. Pin's on the right, I'm going to fade it in. This is more, if you hit 100 balls, what percentage of your shots do what you intended to do, and then where on the spectrum gives you the tightest dispersion. Now, the reason why this is important, right, is because imagine someone does take Hogan's quote very literally, and they go out and they say, right, I'm going to try and draw this on the range. And they hit a shot and it pushes, but it pushes like 30 foot right. And they go, oh, God, it didn't draw. Right, I better make sure this next one, because Hogan said, I got to make sure it goes right. What are they going to do? If they know anything,
Yeah.
they're going to try and close the face
Overcook it.
more, or they're
Yeah.
going to try and wing their path more to the right. Cool, that one drew. That one drew onto my target. And then they hit another one. It's a snap hook. They're like, oh, well, it curved in the right way, but it went too far left. And then they start to self-organize a path that's more and more right, and a face that's more and more close to it. Now, when that happens over time, and actually, I ran some of the math on this as well. Do you know what a tour player's face standard deviation is? Like their average face variance?
Assuming it's in half a degree to a degree. I don't know.
It's about 1 degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about 1 degree. So what that means is, they hit a target on shot, they hit a shot on target. The next one might be 1 degree more left of that, 1 degree more right of that. About 66% or something, 69% of shots are going to fall within 1 degree either side for face window. And then if they want to almost ensure, right, if they want to get 95% confidence level, their shots are going to fall in a certain area, that's going to be 2 standard deviations.
Mhm.
So in other words, a pro has about a 4 degree window, face window. Now an amateur has about double of that, at a 15 handicap. They have about 2 degree standard deviation for face angle. So what I've worked out is that if you wanted to guarantee your balls curve one way to a 95% success level, at a pro level, you'd have to have a path that's about 5 degrees in to out. And your face windows would be +5 to +1. Those would produce shots that you'd have a 15-yard push right, on target shots, and then 15 left would be your farthest left. Now, if you wanted to do that at the amateur level, your path would have to be about 11 degrees in to out, right? So if an amateur, an average golfer, 10, 15 handicap is trying to live by Hogan's quote, they're going to eventually self-organize a path that is 11 degrees offline. That is never going to work out well for someone. So we have to be somewhere closer to the middle of the spectrum or less on the extreme end, right? If Hogan's on one end of the extreme, make sure it curves one way. And the other end of the argument is, hey, go for neutral and let it fall both ways. Somewhere along that line is going to be the right answer. And I don't think it's Hogan's.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm thinking, do you think golfers overemphasize the curvature of their ball, like in their memory, versus actually, it's very hard for our brains to like data plot like where the ball ended up. So meaning like we give more value to what it looked like in the air versus where it ended up. And in other words, most people would say like, oh, if I'm fader of the golf ball, all my shots, as Hogan's quote says, like they've got to curve left to right for me to be a good iron player with a fade. And that's not true when you look at, if you do that, that's always that powerful image of the 17th at TPC Sawgrass where they show all of the golfers' shots for the day and like the different dispersions and trajectories. And you kind of see like, well, these are the best in the world and look how wild this is. And when you realize, like, if you took a good player who is a stock fade player and showed that shot pattern all the time, you'd see some slight pull draws, some straight lefts, some curves, some left to right, some overcooked left to right. So you would actually see all of that. And I think our brains can't remember that effectively. It's just very hard for us to process all of that. So it leads to that type of thinking where you're like, the good shots are only the ones that curve left to right that amount of yards. Like the shot I'm looking for, and everything else is no good, maybe. That's just like a thought I have.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's end position of shot, not how it got there, really. And when you see those shot dispersions on the tour, you see the left side of that pattern, the ones that go in the water on 17. Some people will look at that and say, oh, that must have been a pull for that player. other players like me might have looked at that and go, "Oh, that was probably a hook for
Yeah,
that
yeah,
player."
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you could interpret the same end result, but ultimately it's just the end result. How it got there is far less relevant, which is my main point. If you hit shots and that you layer them over the flag, you hit 100 shots over the flag and some faded within that, let's say, 30-foot circle, and some drew, there were slight pull draws into that 30-foot
Yeah,
circle.
that's
Doesn't
essentially my
matter.
point is like you almost have to, if you are someone who is expecting that, you almost have to trick yourself into saying like, well, no, I understand based on where my club face is pointing, I should see a bunch of different ball flights. And that's okay. I don't need to panic and overdo it in response to that. I guess yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that is that you have to be open to all these different, it's actually probably something I've been struggling with the last couple of years as my draw has turned into straight almost falling right. It's been difficult for my brain to process that, and it almost feels like dangerous to me. And I've been trying to like think logically about it too, be like, oh, your club head delivery's changed, like, and that's okay. But yeah, seeing the difference in ball flight through the air has, there's no question, it kind of impacts your perception of how good you are or how well things are going.
Yeah, it initially happened for me as well when I went from that kind of 95% drawer onto the ball with a insane in to out path and slinging it. There was some kind of confidence that you get from knowing this ball is going to curve one way. That
Yes.
confidence doesn't translate to better shots necessarily. Yes, I
No.
understood when I first started hitting straighter shots, there's a little bit of, ooh, I don't know which way this is going to go. So on one end of the spectrum, you could say that. However, on the other end of the spectrum, I could say, well, hey, I'm no longer having to aim at water and draw it away from that. If there's
Yes.
water on the right, I used to have to aim at the water and draw it off that because I knew my ball was going to draw every time. And that was scary sometimes, thinking,
S
ooh, am I not going to draw it? And then you'd overdo it and you hit the
yes.
huge left side of your spectrum and you end up with a wider dispersion because the mental factors going in. Whereas now I just aim at the middle of the green or my target and let it fall slightly either side. I
Yeah,
can
I
play
think
away from the water more.
that's exactly what I'm thinking is that if you felt more comfortable with the bigger curvature and you're just like, no, it comes right to left. But that really means you're probably overdoing it and too extreme, but it feels good. And you're not thinking about where the ball's ending up like that shot fly. You're just thinking, I know the ball's going right to left. That makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Whereas the truth of the matter is when you actually did straighten it out, your dispersion did tighten, but it made you a little more uncomfortable to see more balls falling to the right and drawing less than usual. So your brain is saying, this doesn't look as good, but the actual data is, yes, it is better. So that the two are at odds with one another. And that is part of this game is like you're getting signals to your brain that you're interpreting as like perhaps dangerous or bad when it's actually better for you. And you need to know, one of the hard parts is knowing to distinguish between the two. Sometimes it's the opposite.
Well, ultimately, all the factors that go into shot patterns are going to manifest themselves in the shot pattern. Okay, so if you say, "Oh, I'm really unconfident when I try and hit it straight because I don't know which way it's going to fall," if
Yes.
you think that makes you into a mental mess and affects the shot pattern, you'll see it after 100 shots. You
Yeah,
look at
yeah,
the
yeah.
shot pattern and it's everywhere, and then you can say, okay, we don't know why it's everywhere, but maybe it's because you don't like to see it and there's lack of confidence. But if you say, I'm so unconfident with this, and yet your shot pattern is tighter, I would say, well, screw your confidence.
Yeah.
Confidence, the shot pattern is going to override your confidence.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you just need to, I guess the underlying truth about all of this is that in order for you to go through this, you will need to actually collect the data. And most golfers are not, even myself included. I don't have nearly as much granular data as you do. Like you're more interested in collecting it. So yeah, that's a lot of golf ends up being our hazy memories of what our brain picked out, right? So when you think about your rounds, if you're not going through a very strict review process, or let's say you're not plotting your shots or having a system do it for you, you are relying on your brain's emotional slash hazy memory of what occurred the last 4 or 5 hours. And sometimes you're thinking back to it a week or two later, or you're thinking back to your entire season. Like I was just in a session, I was with Woody Lashman the other day. We were kind of looking at my irons again And I was kind of thinking through to 'em, like, all the shots I hit all year. I don't think that was I mean, I had an idea, but it wasn't great. I probably should have done a better job of knowing what I was doing. I was kind of relying on my, like, mental instincts, which aren't always true. Like, they're wrong sometimes. In fact, they're wrong many times.
Yeah,
So, yeah, that is it's hard to discern that because you will need to see the actual true evidence through good data collection.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think one of the things here is why is this important, and or why am I even bothering with this argument? And it's because I'm seeing more recently where pupils come for lessons, and say, for example, they've got a super in to out path, and they're hooking everything into the target, but then their attack angle is very, very shallow, maybe closer to zero, and they say, "Well, you know what? I suffer a lot with fats and thins." And you say, well, okay, well, we need to get that low point more forwards. And one of the lowest hanging fruits here is to swing the club more left, right? You swing the club more left, that moves the low point forwards, the attack angle gets steeper. And so in doing that, after a while of doing that, they look at their shot pattern and they're like, yeah, I'm striking it much better with this. Look, my low point is more forwards, but look, now I'm having shots that are curving more to the right with some of them. Shouldn't I be curving every shot left? I've had this scenario so many times or
It makes perfect
similar to
sense.
this.
Yeah, because it feels
And
more
then I have to
comfortable.
explain to
Yeah.
them that, look, it doesn't matter if your ball curves left or right in your shot pattern. I then show them the bird's eye view of the shot pattern and say, look, you were as tight or tighter when you had the ball fall both ways. And that's another argument you get online is people say, oh, but shaping it gives you a bigger margin for error. No, it
No,
doesn't.
yeah, not
No, it
necessarily.
doesn't. It's
That's
down
an
to the face
assumption.
window.
Yeah, that's an
The
assumption.
only the only time shaping it will tighten your dispersion is if it allows you to produce a tighter face to path. Well, sorry, scrap that. The only time shaping it is going to reduce or improve your dispersion is if your face presentation gets more consistent around
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Generally, some caveats to that. I know people caveat. Generally, that's the reason why you get a tighter dispersion. It has nothing to do with the way that it shapes there. It's more to do that if I look at the face standard deviation, I say, hey, when you're shaping it, you got a 1 degree face standard deviation. And when you're doing straight, it's 2 degree standard deviation. We say, well, let's pick the one with the 1 degree standard deviation because that's producing a tighter dispersion. But the idea that shaping it makes your face control better is complete myth. Because I've seen so many people where I change the path, I move it more towards neutral, and the face control stays the same or gets better. So there's way too many examples of that to say that shaping it improves face control. It's
No,
just a
that
lot
I
of people
mean,
who say that it's not based on data usually.
what you just described is exactly what I went through the last 8, 10 years. Huge draw, 0 angle of attack, very into out, and then now it's 4 down with a 7 iron and 3 or 4 into out or less. And yeah, I see less curvature and some falling to the right, but the shots are better. I'm hitting more greens and holding more greens because of that. But it is uncomfortable along the way. And I think that's where you face the resistance. And it makes sense, like, if people are going to argue about it online in a vacuum to say, well, yeah, I'd rather hit the 10-yard draw every time than the 3-yard draw that sometimes is a push fade the other half of the time, and just, like, totally ignoring, like, well, where are the shots ending up? You're just as I said earlier, I think we are overemphasizing how the ball flies through the air versus where it ends up and how often it ends up where it does. That is that's what I think is the core issue now that I'm kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, you can show someone a bird's eye view of a shot pattern of 100 shots, and most people wouldn't be able to identify, did the player draw 90% of those? Did they fade 90% of those? Did they hit them 50-50 spin
Mhm.
axes like me? They can't determine that from the result.
Well,
What matters is the
it makes
result.
sense. Like, we like what do humans like? We like certainty. We like repeated, we like to be able to do the same thing and produce the same thing over and over again. That's why so many people end up hating golf because golf just does the opposite. It gives you not those things. you don't get repeatability. And and when we talk about the game, you're like, yeah, this should be happening. It should be this way. And then you're just always at odds with this. And whether it shows up in shot shaping or how many putts you're making or the variability of your scoring from round to round, like it is at odds with what makes us comfortable. So I
Yeah.
get why people argue the way they do, but you need to find the right answer for yourself if you really want to get to the bottom of it.
And ultimately, the right answer for yourself is if you test these things and you can see in the outcome, like all the knowns and unknowns. It's like, oh, well, I'm unconfident doing this. Okay, well, that's going to come out. That's going to manifest itself in the outcome.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't know how to hit a fade. Well, that's going to manifest itself in the outcome. Or, oh, my strike gets worse when I try and hit a draw. Okay, that'll manifest itself in the outcome. You'll get a wider dispersion. We test them, we pick the winner, and then you see if that translates out on the golf course as well. There's generally no reason why it shouldn't, but you test and see that on the golf course. And yeah, it's just, I mean, okay, on the margin for error one, I did a blog post recently where I simulated, okay, here's a person with a neutral path, here's a person with a drawer's path. Now we're going to simulate face being 2 degrees too open, 1 degree too open, being right on the number, 1 degree closed, 2 degrees closed. And we're going to look at the dispersion. It's the same. It's the same. Yes, okay, a draw changes the tilt of the dispersion versus a fade, but ultimately the proximity to the pin, proximity to the middle of that dispersion is going to be about the same for the fade and the draw, even from just a pure physics level. And then when you add the human element in and you test, you're more likely to see one winner, one distinct winner, and you say, okay, well, that's good. Hey, if I'm not confident with the winner, oh, I don't like hitting a fade, I hate hitting a fade, then that's for you to decide whether lower scores or confidence are more important to you.
I do wonder what Hogan would have, let's say we did get him in this episode, what he would have said. It would have been interesting.
All right, I'm done with that one. So
Okay.
the episode,
Yeah, I think so. I had a separate topic, but I have a feeling that would turn this into a 3 hour episode, and that's not what we're doing. We'll tackle my topic in a separate episodes. What's what's your closing arguments, counselor?
worry less about whether a ball shapes a certain way and worry more about the outcome dispersion. Test if you have the ability, test and see where on the spectrum you are. Are you when you try and hit it straight, what happens? You might never hit a straight shot. You might hit 1,000, never hit one straight. But if your dispersion is 20 foot right to 20 foot left, that's a good dispersion and use that. Yeah, that's what I say. Just test. You'll see that, and then try and translate that to the golf course.
Nicely put. I
Your
don't think I have
closing?
much to. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, it's my main thought was that I think our eyes and our mind tricks us at times and could lure us into a false sense of security with too extreme of a pattern to produce that similar shot shape. Whereas maybe you would be better off with something that looks a little more uncomfortable to you, but as you said, would produce the better dispersion. Not maybe for everyone, but for some people. Again, that there is, I guess the last point I'll make is that there's just no way to give a blanketed statement that works for all of you. It's literally impossible, opposed to like the pure physics of ball striking and what makes a golf ball do what it does. So yeah, I think it's a good topic just because how the ball curves through the air is very important and our interpretation of it is very important and intentions. So hopefully we get you thinking more about how to make the right decisions in your game and hopefully have the right intention. So thanks everyone who makes it to the end of these episodes. Adam, what's the relevant info you have if people want to learn more?
AdamYoungGolf.com. The accuracy plan would be your way. That it gives you very simple ways of quantifying your direction that you can use on the course, and it shows you how to test these things, how to hit different shots if you need to, how to fix your patterns, make tighter dispersions. So everything's in the accuracy plan. John, where can people
Awesome.
find you?
Check out my YouTube channel, For Foundations of Golf, and keep listening to our show. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time with a new episode.